How viable is it to make a build with as high spell damage as you possibly can get, but actually use it? What is going on, guys? It is Venom Surge here, and welcome back to another episode of Elder Scrolls Online. In today's episode, we are going to try to get as high spell damage as possible, but most builds who try this, you cannot actually use it in content, as the uptime for everything is very delicate. But this build is set up in a way that we can maintain that spell damage for almost 100% uptime. If there's any other sets or build ideas that you'd like me to try out, please let me know down in the comments. Let's get to this. Usually my videos, I will be showcasing a specific set. Today will be a bit different as this is a full build based on getting as high spell damage as possible. Now this is in the PTS where everything is set up for hybridization. For simplicity, I'm just going to be saying spell damage and spell crit, which is what we're focused on. So our first set is Moon Hunter. This comes from the dungeon Moon Hunter Keep. You can get it on normal or vet. The first line gives you spell damage, crit chance, and then when your alchemical poisons fire, you increase your spell damage by 547 for 8 seconds. Now poisons, we are using the crown lethal poison. This is basically just a double dot poison that you can craft. It has a 10-second cooldown, which means we have 2 seconds where we do not get this increase, but that is a lot better than at some of the other options where we have half the time without it. Both of these are Nirn honed, and we are just using the poisons, so the enchants do not matter. And these are both swords. And for the jewelry, we're using spell damage infused. For our second set, we are using a 4-piece of Witch Knight's Defiance. This comes from the Reach in the Mark Earth DLC. You can get this overland. It gives you spell damage, and spell damage. We are not using the 5th piece, and you will see why now. We are using Thrassians. This comes from the Greymore DLC. This gives you a stack when you kill an enemy, up to 50 stacks maximum. Each stack increases your spell damage by 23, but it reduces your max health by 120 and reduces the effectiveness of your shield by 1%. You lose everything if you swap instances, if you die, if you crouch, you go invisible, or if you take off the item set. A lot of people may not like using Thrassian, so I will give some examples for what you could use instead, but because we are using this, we will not be using the 5th piece of Witch Knight's Defiance. And if we were to use the 5th piece, this doesn't give us spell damage, it increases our spell damage to the target, so we wouldn't see it on the stats. For our monster helm, we are using Malagina. This gives us spell damage for the 1 piece, and then for the 2 piece, when we light attack 2 times in a row, there cannot be a skill in between, you trigger overkill for 6 seconds, which increases your spell damage by 560, but also increases the cost of abilities by 8%. It can occur every 6 seconds. That 8% may seem like a lot, but it is not much of an issue because we are set up in a hybrid style. Now, other than Thrassians, we are using full medium, all divines. Thrassians is the only light piece. Ideally, we'd have all medium, but Thrassians is forced to be light. Now, if you don't want to use Thrassians, you could swap out Witch Knight's Defiance for something like Sororia. That can give you a lot more spell damage, or Burning Spell Weave. But I looked at every single set in the game and looked at what gave you the most spell damage with the most uptime. There were better combinations of sets that had higher spell damage, but the uptime was not good whatsoever, so it was not actually reliable in combat. Now for our consumables, we are using Ghastly Eyeball. This is to give us more mag and mag recovery. You could also do Banana Bunny Hash for more health when Thrassians decreases your health if you use that. You could also do Witch Mother's Potent Brew to get a nice combination of all 3. You could use Tri-Stat Potions if you want, however, we do not have major sorcery from skills, so we are using the Spellcaster Elixir. You can take a look at our stats here. What we're mainly focusing on is our spell damage, so unbuffed, not doing anything. Sitting on our front bar, we are at 7.4k spell damage. Now notice our crit chance is very low for most people. Usually you can push up to 50 to 70% crit chance, but we are not focusing on crit, we are just focusing on maximum spell damage. 64 attributes into Magicka, and we're using the Apprentice Mundus Stone. Now to really understand this build, we need to look at the different layers of complexity that this build has. But first, to understand it all, we need to look at our skills. For our first skill, we are using Barbed Trap. This gives instant bleed damage and then a DOT for bleed damage, but it also gives us minor force, increasing our crit damage by 10%. Now, we don't have high crit. As you see, we only have 27%, but that is still a quarter of the time we will crit, and if you are spamming DOTs out and spamming tons of attacks, you will crit quite often. And when we get high spell damage, those crits can be massive. Next up, we are using Turn Evil. I never use this. This is here for passives. Evil Hunter, this is here for passives. You can activate it to expose enemies, but while it is also active, it increases the damage of Stamina, Fighters Guild abilities, which if you notice, that is almost our entire front bar. But while it's slotted, we gain Major Savagery and Prophecy. That's how we get a bit more crit chance on the front bar. One of our spammables is Silver Shards. This is a ranged attack that does 12.2k damage. Now this is all unbuffed, by the way. These are high numbers and they're unbuffed. But it also does a 5-meter radius around the target, and everybody else takes 22% less damage that the initial target took. This is our flex bot. Now this is going to change drastically depending on what type of setup you want. Currently we are using Bloodthirst. This is a jab from the dual wield tree that attacks an enemy about 5 times. You heal for the damage done. But what's important about this is this can proc your poisons like crazy. So the second your poisons are ready to be procced again, this thing procs them like no other. For our ultimate, we are back into the Fighters Guild and we are using Flawless Dawnbreaker. This does 17k up front in a cone and then about 20k physical damage over 6 seconds. But after we activate this, our spell damage is increased by another 300 for 20 seconds. If you notice, we are using every single Fighters Guild ability on our front bar, and you will see why in the passives. On the back bar, we are a vampire, and we are using Simmering Frenzy. This applies stacks that gives us spell damage up to 400 spell damage, but while this is active, our health is getting drained, but they nerfed the health drain to stay limited, so our heal over time can actually perfectly balance this out. That reminds me, guys, we have not actually gone over the back bar. We are using a Maelstrom Perfected Lightning Staff. It does not matter that it's Maelstrom, it does help. The main important thing is it's a destruction staff that's lightning, and we are using infused with weapon damage glyph on the back bar. Now back to the wall of elements. This does 1300 shock damage to every target in the carpet, and it can set concussed enemies off balance for 7 seconds, and then when this ends, it explodes for 8k. In the Restoring Light, we are using Extended Ritual. This can be used to cleanse 5 harmful effects from us. That's not really what I use it for. I use this for the heal. This skill alone counteracts Simmering Frenzy's health drain, and it lasts for 24 seconds, so you rarely need to think about it. And next up is Vampire's Bane. This does 5k up front and then 16k over 16 seconds. We do get Major Prophecy and Savagery off of this. That does not matter. We are using this for passes, and you will see later. Now this last slot here is also a flex spot. I currently have Honor the Dead here just for another heal, but that is not needed. You could slot Puncturing Sweep. This is a great spammable, as well as Javelin, which you will see the numbers later. This thing gets scary. You could also use Blazing Spear for a nice DOT as well. For our ultimate, we're going into Dawn's Wrath, and we are doing Solar Prison. This does 5k every second for 10 seconds. It applies Major Maim to all the enemies, and allies can synergize and deal 23k magic damage instantly and stun all enemies for 5 seconds. Very powerful. Okay guys, now to the important passives. We are a Templar for a specific reason. Templars are one of the only classes that have a passive that just straight up increases your spell damage by a percentage. The Sword has increased physical damage and lightning damage, but that is a specific damage type and that's your damage done. This goes straight to our spell damage, which when you're dealing with high numbers, this gets freaking high as well. So Templars are actually the highest spell damage possible out of all the classes. In Dawn's Wrath, the reason why we are using Vampire's Bane is it procs Illuminate. This gives us minor sorcery, which increases our spell damage by another 10%. In the dual wield line, we are using 2 swords because each sword increases our spell damage by 142. In the medium armor tree, we have agility. This is why we want as much medium armor as possible. This increases our spell damage by another 12%. In the Fighter's Guild ability, Slayer increases our spell damage by another 15%. That is why we have all these skills slotted on the front bar. We don't actually use these 2, but the other ones are very useful and high damage. And we are a high elf because we also get more spell damage. Now the dark elf and the orc also get the same amount of spell damage, but I chose this because it has more magicka. Now here's where we run into an issue. The poisons have a 20% chance to proc on light attacks, heavy attacks, or weapon abilities. You can't light attack and heavy attack that quickly, but Bloodthirst attacks like freaking fast. As you can see here, each of those things proc the poison. As you can see, we got it the first try. But this is a stamina focused ability, which means if we're magicka focused, we don't have a lot of stamina to mess with. So another option is to focus on max stamina but keep the spell damage high. Our sets do not give us magicka anywhere. There is no magicka from our sets. All the magicka we get is from food and enchant, so you can easily swap all of these to have max stamina. And then I would also do the orc race or the dark elf race because we do get that 2k magicka from being a high elf. And then also make sure to get your medicinal use so your potions last longer. Before we get into the layers of the complexity of this build, let's first look at our spell damage that you guys already saw. We got 7.4k. Now the first layer is the easiest layer to get your spell damage. This is where everything, your spell damage will be up 100% of the time. This will never fluctuate. Your potions have 100% uptime as long as you keep them up. Wall of Elements continuously will proc your enchant as long as it is up. You still have to keep your skills going, but these are guaranteed procs. Simmering Frenzy always stays on. To counteract Simmering Frenzy, put down your healing circle. Then you never need to think about it again. Vampire's Bane, you got 20 seconds of minor sorcery. Keep that up. So those 4 back bar things and your potion is enough to get us to 10.5k spell damage. You will be running around with that much spell damage at all times. And you don't need to think about it. Just keep those buffs up. Now this is without our sets being procced. The next easiest proccing thing would be your 2 light attacks to get Malakina. Malakina has basically 100% uptime as long as you light attack multiple times. As you saw there, we were at 11.4k, something like that. Okay, we have our poisons. We are at 12.3k spell damage. That is with our poisons being procced and Malakina. To go it over again, these 4 skills on the back bar and your potion. That's the first layer, 100% uptime guaranteed. The next layer is where your sets are trying to proc. The poisons are difficult. You need to either be light attacking like crazy, which you'll need to for Malakina, or use these jabs. If you do not use these jabs, it is so much harder to get those poisons to proc. So I would highly recommend going max stamina rather than magicka, what I've done here. In your rotation, you can easily get 2 light attacks in there. If you want, you can light attack bar swap and then light attack skill. So let's say you're on your back bar here, resetting your things. You can wall of elements, light attack bar swap, light attack skill. There's easy ways to get 2 light attacks in a row. Bar swaps still count for Malakina, as you saw there, now it's procced. The next complex layer is your ultimate. This will never have 100% uptime because you need to get your ultimate going. Now we do have a passive in the Fighters Guild tree where you gain ultimate whenever you kill an enemy with a Fighters Guild ability slotted. So you can generate ulti as long as you're killing things, but that's not guaranteed. So what we're going to do, get everything going here, and then your ultimate. 12.8k. That's without Thrassians. Thrassians is not procced right now. I also forgot to mention we are only a vampire stage 1, so our abilities don't cost too excessively between the vampire and Malakina. Now we're able to get almost 13k without Thrassians, and then also keep our health up and everything like that. So that's where it's viable. If we start introducing Thrassians into this, that is where it becomes so much more challenging, and I don't think you'll actually be able to use this as a build unless you have a really good healer. I also forgot to mention in the CP, we are using the Untamed Aggression for more weapon and spell damage. This gives us more weapon and spell damage to our damaging abilities, but I don't think this actually shows in the stat sheet. It might though, I'm not sure. We are also getting increased light attack damage by 15% and Master at Arms for direct damage attacks, and you'll see why later. In the red tree, we're getting more armor and max health, and then stam and mag recovery whenever we kill an enemy. Now guys, here's the issue with Thrassians. Because you can never actually leave an instance with it, or die with it for that matter, that means you are stuck wherever you're at. So if you're in a dungeon and you go into a different instance in that dungeon, you lose your stacks of Thrassians. And then as you can see here, it can be very annoying to get it if you're overworld. I have to go around and kill all these individual adds to try and get those stacks. Now as you can see here, with the lowest tier of damage, just our light attacks are doing almost 10k. Silver bolts 13.8, 13.8. Actually that's more like 13.9. And that was without the Wall of Elements procced. So there is 25k right there for that crit. So it is a very strong build and very easy to get. Like the poisons are proccing like crazy. But the main issue is trying to survive. Like as you can see here, I'm about to die to these simple adds. Because once you get Thrassians going, it's not even fully going yet. But once you get it going, you only have about 12k max health. Now that's another thing. I already mentioned that you might want to go to stam. Your crossbow is also stam, and it's a great skill. But if you're using that and your weapon jabs, it can become a major problem. Now you could also do the Templar jabs. Those are great for healing, but they will not proc your poisons. You will only proc the poisons by doing light attacks. So I'm going to keep working on building up these stacks, and then I'll meet back with you guys. Okay guys, now here's the tricky part. So let's look at our stats now. Only 12.7k max health. Now if I slotted the bunny hash or the potent brew, then we would have more max health. Now this is what our spell damage is on the front bar with Thrassians on. Okay guys, I found a Bullnesh, so hopefully we can test on him and see the full procs without it dying right away. Alright, so we're gonna get Simmering Frenzy, drink our potion. These two down. Poisons, ulti, 14.663. That is what this build can do. Now, that is with Thrassians and your ulti, which is not likely whatsoever. The ulti is more likely than Thrassians. Now let's go find another bull netch, and this time we won't use our ulti so you can see those numbers. So that way you guys can know what the full uptime is if you do decide to use Thrassians in this build. Alright, let's do it. Hopefully we can get it. 12.4. 14.2k, as you guys saw there. That is without using the ultimate. Yeah guys, so this thing can actually get pretty powerful. Now because it fluctuates so much, I can't show you guys the tooltips of the skills that easily unless we go onto the Elder Scrolls Online calculator. So guys, this is just the UESP.net build calculator here. We have our current build set up, and this is with full Thrassians. Now this is bugged. It does not recognize Simmering Frenzy, so we are actually missing 400 spell damage. It doesn't recognize that it's turned on. So as you see here, when we procced everything, we were at 14.7k spell damage. We are missing 700-ish spell damage from Simmering Frenzy. Even though it only gives 400, we have so much percentages that it gives us another 300, which is quite a bit. Now, assuming we're at the burst of your ultimate, all these four are procced, your potions are procced, and Thrassians, Malakina, and Moon Hunter are all turned on. So this is at the height of your damage, excluding Simmering Frenzy, so you will get higher numbers than this. Let's look at the Javelin. Now the Javelin was changed to where it ignores armor and block. The Javelin's doing 13k magic damage. That may not sound like a lot compared to most spammables, but this ignores resistances and blocks. Most DPS people in PvP are running around 30k. You can almost two-shot them, and if you crit, you might be able to two-shot them. Because we're so high on spell damage, this thing hits like a truck. Now let's look at puncturing sweeps. You heal for half the amount of damage that this is doing, and this is doing crazy numbers. Want to see something even more scary? Your ultimate. This is dealing about 21k magic damage over 1.8 seconds, but it can deal up to this amount more health when enemies are low health. Even just this alone is already kind of scary, but when you multiply it by 4.8, which technically, from what I understand, it should be actually 5.8 because it takes the initial and adds this. So it's not just straight up, but even if it is just straight up, you're doing that much damage. And you heal for 20% of that. You get this amount of healing from executing. So if you're doing a boss or something like that, like that's a lot of health. Your burst heal, 30k up front. Your freaking ultimate, 10k every second. And if you synergize, you're doing that much. Your Fighter's Guild shard here is doing 20k, and it's a ranged spammable, very cheap too. It is a massive thing. Your Vampire's Bane does 10k up front, 30k over 16 seconds. Resolving Vigor, 43.5k over 4 seconds. You're basically doing 10k a second with that. Now let's say Thrassians isn't procced and your ulti's turned off. So you have no ulti there, and we will keep 17 stacks of Thrassians. I did the math. 17 stacks of 23 spell damage is 391 spell damage. That is 10 less than Simmering Frenzy gives us. So remember that number? That's actually about what we're at with the Monster Helm and Moon Hunter proccing. So this is what we're going to be used to seeing pretty much all the time as long as your sets are proccing, and even with that you're still doing 40k. That Javelin is still doing about 12k. That is why we also chose Master at Arms, so the direct damage attacks, which would be our Javelin, hits harder. And that is where I went Max Magicka focused. You can spam this, but if you're using this on your front bar, that means you're not getting your poisons proccing that often. It's up to you. It's a very difficult setup. I am losing a lot if I move this onto the back bar instead. So there could be, and then you have the bloodthirst there. There's tons of rearranging you could do with this, but this build is freaking powerful. Your javelin is still doing 10k damage. And this is without Thrassians. This is the simplest level of this build, and you can still hit for 10k on that freaking javelin. Okay guys, so now onto the outfit. For the helmet, we are using the heavy outlaw helm. For the breastplate, we are using the light sapriarch robes. For the shoulders, we are using the light ancient arc epaulets. For the hands, we are using medium ancient orc bracers. For the sash, we are using light dreadhorn sash. For the legs, it does not matter because the robe is covering it. For the feet, we are using heavy worm colt sabatons. For the sword in the right hand, we are using Ashlander sword. For the sword in the left hand, we are using Night Hollow dagger. For the Destro staff, we are using Silver Rose staff. For the black, we are using Thalmor black. For the blood red color, we are using Craglorn crimson. Except for the shoulder metal piece and the helmet, we are actually using Flame Knight light red to kind of keep that same color. And then we are using Colovian deep brown on the waist and book bag, as well as the staff. I'll go over the color slots for you guys once again. Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. This was a really fun project to do, although it took a lot of research trying to look at the maximum spell damage of every set in the game. But very pleased with the outcome of this thing. Now obviously you are constricting yourself in a lot of ways, especially with those Fighters Guild skills and all that, but this is a lot more viable than a lot of the other builds I've seen where they try to get as high max weapon or spell damage. They had to get perfect timed screenshots to get those numbers, whereas this thing, it does fluctuate and we have short timers, but we have 100% uptime timers. So if there's any other sets in the game that you guys would like me to showcase or try to make a unique build out of, please let me know down in the comments. If you guys enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to help our community grow and join the Venom Syndicate. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys next time.